So we're going to move, Anthony and Amanda, onto the more structured part of our regular holding to account. And the first one is around something that fills my mailbag a lot, around OCC performance, our communication centre performance. And I just want to touch specifically on 999, that priority emergency response. And we've seen some dips in performance in the last 3 months or so, and I just wanted to ask just sort of an update of where we are and the steps that the force is taking to make sure that we can fulfil that commitment of being there as fast as we can in the times of emergency.
It doesn't get any more important than our ability as an emergency service, our ability to answer emergency calls, and therefore we will always prioritise and have a daily monitoring of our ability to ensure that we can react quickly, answer, as Amanda said earlier, within the 10 seconds of a 999 call coming in, and most of those are answered within a second or two, as you would expect. So anything outside of our accepted norm as to how we do that is scrutinised very, very carefully. Slightly different on the 101s, because we have to make difficult choices about what we prioritise, and if there's ever a strain in the system, I will always prioritise our ability to answer emergency calls over non-emergency calls, for the very obvious reason that one is more important. Having said that, we also ensure the majority of the volume comes in the non-emergency. That is people who require on much greater numbers our service. So we do want to make sure that we can match our resources in the control room and be able to dispatch, and the whole system can become clogged if you're not careful. And we've not really talked about it yet, but we are probably doing more as a police force and as a police service, both locally and nationally, with far less than we once had. And the demands of the public haven't gone away, they've increased. The public rightly have an expectation of what we can deliver, and we do try and match that. So we've got to get the right people with the right skills who are very efficient in their role and can triage properly, risk assess properly, and then dispatch our officers and staff accordingly. So we have a daily scrutinisation of doing this properly.
So during May, I'm amazed to read that that the force got 11,368 calls into the 999 system, which is pretty amazing volume, and 78% of those were answered within those 10 seconds. And your aspiration's around 90%, isn't it? So the force is improving, and indeed not far from where it should be. We're committed, and indeed it's built, but we're not in it yet. Our new command and control centre with the fire service and other partner agencies. Can you just touch, Amanda, briefly on some of the benefits of why we're making that investment and what difference it'll make to those who call us in that time of emergency?
Yeah, okay. So at the moment, we don't... everybody that calls the police on 101 and 999 goes straight into our control room that we've got here at Hinlip. That control room has been in effect for many years. The space isn't fit for purpose anymore, and the systems that we use need replacing in order to allow us to be able to make more accurate assessments, to be able to utilise all of the intelligence systems that we have, so that we can get all of the available information right before our operators, instead of them having to research many various systems, and to be more effective and efficient in terms of being able to deliver the service that we want to the public. So the programme has now completed with the build of the new OCC, the new Command and Control Centre here at Hinlip, and we are now going through the process of upgrading and replacing all of our telephony across the force, to ensure that when you ring into our control room and you want to speak to an officer, then you can be directed straight to that officer without us having to handle that call for you. And we are also making sure that we replace all of our command and control system to make it one that allows us to be able to interrogate all of our systems immediately, and allows us to do a proper sort of assessment using all of the information that we have about the caller that's ringing in. It allows us to be able to understand where our resources are, to allocate them more appropriately, so we get the most appropriately trained officer to the scene as quickly as we possibly can. And it should make that experience for our public who ring us in times of emergency much slicker, much more efficient and much more effective. I pay tribute to our staff that work in our command and control rooms. They're doing a really difficult job in really difficult circumstances, and they do that day in and day out. They've been instrumental in designing the new command and control facilities that we've got, and in what we have bought for them for the future, so that they can deliver the service that they want to deliver. So I think a huge investment, one that needed to happen, and one that should equip us for the future.
All this work as well being done at the same time as maintaining the business as usual, and I visited the control room myself and seen the great work that they do, and indeed I don't have the skill sets that they do in terms of dealing with the vast array of different demands on the organisation. It's great to hear the investment that will bring them into the 21st century to help give them the tools to do the job that I know they want to do for our community.
Just going on from that, John, I know that all four of us have spent time in the control centre listening to calls that are coming in. And I know the public are always sort of horrified when they realise some of the things that people phone in about, and the fact that they don't like the idea that the police are spending time on calls that shouldn't really be directed at the police. And obviously, the public would prefer that the services were, the resources were directed in the right way. What are you doing about those types of calls and educating some members of the public about what they phone in about?
So we do a huge amount of work around that, and without publicly embarrassing people, we're trying to make sure that we that we educate the caller, we educate the public generally. We provide other avenues of the signpost availability, and we make sure that where we have an ongoing issue with some, because sometimes we get people who ring in continually, and we do the work behind the scenes to problem solve, because actually there's an underlying issue there. So we do quite a lot of work around understanding that and making sure that we're responding appropriately. What I would say about our 101 system is we do not queue people into calls. We don't answer in order to identify that we've answered within so many minutes and then put somebody into a queue system where they have to wait for a quite considerable amount of time. That's not the approach that we've taken. So I suppose my plea to the public is, please think about what you're ringing about. If it is a police matter, then of course ring us. Please be patient with us. If you're ringing on the 101, it probably is that we're dealing with a 999 emergency that needs our immediate assistance. Our staff work really hard to make sure that they give a good service, and we are improving each and every day.
Can I just have one other point as well, since we've got kind of the audience? We would also ask people to think carefully about the time that they ring. If it is a time critical, even though it's a non-emergency and there's something going on and they need to, that's fine, and of course they will ring at the time. But if they have a choice, they're much the same as if you ring your utility company or your bank or whoever it is at a certain time, then logically you might want to ring at a time that is more obviously outside of a very, very busy period when you're likely competing with the 999s and very busy incidents. So please just consider carefully the time you ring.
So not on a Friday, Saturday night.
Yeah, or Thursday night when the football's on. Or something.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that some of the viewers at home might have had either difficulty with either the feed or some of the audio quality. As I said at the beginning, this is the very first time that we've done this, so there might be a few teething problems, but I'll remind you we are recording this separately, and we will also publish all of that recording on a separate post on Facebook afterwards. So if you've missed some of the early parts of the broadcast, don't worry, we have captured the whole of it on a separate device, and we will be publishing that afterwards. We are live. We haven't tried it before, so you'll have to bear with us if some people are getting some of the teething problems. We touched on rural crime, Chief, during the question, so I'm going to move on to cybercrime, if I can. The latest performance shows that there is a continued reduction in the use of cybercrime markers. So that's the note that is put onto the system to identify it as a cybercrime. And this contrasts with the latest last 6 monthly data from the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, which shows an increase in cyber-enabled offences. I'm interested in whether or not you feel that the data, the figures, West Mercia's figures are accurate, and ultimately what it is we are doing about it in terms of the scale of the problem that affects our community.
I think this is probably indicative of a confusion or an interpretation of what does cyber-enabled crime means, and it is possible that the term has become outdated now, because I think when it was first introduced, it was a term that was still something out of the ordinary, and therefore there was a marker that we created so that we could understand that was there a crime that had a cyber element to it. The fact is now that it's almost completely opposite of that. It's almost the exception now. If you don't have a cyber element to every sort of crime, right from bullying, from young people intimidating each other, from some much more serious crimes, most of them will now have a cyber element. And I think what we're seeing there is the accuracy of the national data, which is recording properly when there's a cyber element, and probably an inaccurate use of our marker. I believe because it's become unmanageable, you would have to be putting everything. So we've actually asked for some work now to have a look at to see whether or not that term is becoming redundant, as it's just not serving the purpose that it was when it was first used.
Okay.
As a member of the public, I think there's myself, there's some confusion around what do I report to the police in a cyber crime element. So if I get my credit card cloned, do I report that to the police as well as to my bank, or is that just to the bank? And what sort of things should the public phone in with regarding emails at home and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, we would advise if you are uncertain to ring us, because we can certainly signpost you in the right way. Think about the time of day. Obviously, you're ringing us about it. If it's not an immediate issue, majority, as Chief Constable was just saying, the majority of crimes that we're seeing have some element of either the use of Facebook, the use of the internet, the use of email, that is happening. We work very closely with Action Fraud around, certainly when there's been a use of bank details, that's been sort of equipped by the internet. But I'd encourage people to either have the conversation with their bank, have the conversation with us, and we'll make sure that it gets recorded in the right way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Moving on then to around health and well-being, and we are a people-based organisation. The vast majority of the money that we spend on policing in West Mercia is on people. So it's in obviously absolutely everybody's interest that we've got a good, happy and healthy workforce. There has been a generally increasing trend in staff and officer sickness since the year 16-17, and I'm interested in your approach as the leader, Anthony, of the organisation around, first of all, the understanding the problem, and then also the prevention. Yeah. So if you could just touch on those two areas about making sure the force understands the problem, but also are we doing everything that we can do to help early intervention and getting people back to work?
This is a priority very much for me as chief, for all of us in the organisation. We have a health and wellbeing board which pulls all together the issues of our staff, and I think the most important thing here is we now talk about something that some years ago perhaps we just didn't talk as openly about. And I'll give you two examples. Assaults to police officers, and I know, John, you've supported very much publicly the campaign here. We grew up through a culture where it was just accepted part of the job. You take a knock, you take a bruise, and some of those injuries can be very serious and can have career-lasting impact on the officer. It is now something that we say, no, it isn't acceptable. Assaulting a police officer is never acceptable, and therefore we will deal with the officer in the way that we would deal with a victim. They are a victim, and they deserve the support. Internally then, we can then wrap around support, recognising that both the physical impact of an injury, but also potentially the mental impact of an injury is something that happens over a longer, slower period of time. The second part that we talk a lot more about is just mental health and our general well-being. Officers and staff, they're in a very, very stressful, all day, every day, high tempo, high stress. It's very demanding, very challenging. They are strained, they're making difficult choices, they get some of it wrong, the scrutiny on them is intense, and not surprisingly, over a long, long career, some of that will affect officers, and some of the traumas that they have to witness as part of their duties, of course, has a toll. It has a toll on all of us. So we now talk about the physical as well as the mental well-being of our officers and staff in a very open way, and there's a lot sort of wraparound service. It's not something that people need to be embarrassed. We can give them medical support, we can give the proper support that they need, and are encouraged to come forward and support. But it is very much a priority. It must be, as you said, John, because these are the people that I rely on to go out and deliver the service every day, and they need to be fit, healthy, and well supported.
I was very surprised early on when I launched the Behind the Badge campaign, where it's put to me by a radio presenter, well, it's part of a police officer's job. It's part of their, it's part of what they can expect to happen at going to work. And I worry that there is still elements of the community that think it's acceptable, or indeed part of a police officer's job to be assaulted. And I'm really pleased to see West Mercia's the support that I've seen change in the last 18 months around PAM Assist and all those kind of direct support to officers. And second of all, the overwhelming public are supportive of the police officer and want to make sure that they are adequately protected. And the emergency service worker protection bill's back in the House of Lords at the end of this week, and looks like it's on the way to being supported and becoming law, which is a good thing.
And police officers do understand that they
Yes.
are going to get assaulted, get knocked. That's part of what we have to position ourselves in some highly charged confrontational situations.
Indeed.
But the difference is we don't accept it as that's okay then. And actually, we need to be really clear that if people assault a police officer, they should expect a higher punishment, a higher penalty, because the police officer is the person who has to put themselves in between somebody else when there is likely harm being caused. So it is right that they get the protection, and we want the courts to support that and ensure that if you're silly enough to assault an officer, then you can expect a severe punishment.
Good.
Can I mention one small thing, actually, that somebody stopped me this week to say that people are also very concerned about the animals that are used in the police force and anything that happens to those animals as well. So would they be treated in the same way as a police officer if they were injured, the dogs, for instance?
Well, of course, the police dog and the police handlers are one unit. So if you look at it from a practical perspective, if a dog's hurt, then we no longer have that unit, which damages our ability to do a service. But we shouldn't underestimate first of all, the bravery and courage of these animals. They do a tremendous job. But there's also an emotional attachment, the training, the dogs, the handlers, they live with them. It is part of them, their family, and they are putting themselves into places that most people wouldn't want to go into. And all of us are concerned when an officer or their dog is injured. And sadly, we have had some pretty horrific attacks on some of our animals.
And again, another bit of legislation where they are going to change the protection to service dogs. And I know from some of the briefings that I get around the impact that they have in delivering policing, and it is amazing.
Yeah. And we commend their bravery in the same way as we commend the bravery of the officers.
Absolutely. I just want to, we're going to move back to some of the questions that we've had put live during the broadcast, Anthony, but I just wanted to touch before we can on shoplifting. In the grand scheme of things, it isn't something that necessarily gets to the top of the Thrive model of assessing demand on us, but it has harm to in our community. In some of the collaborative work that the force is doing with local businesses. This might be one for you, Amanda, in terms of your national responsibilities, just to touch on very briefly.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to the point that I made earlier about our most prolific offenders who are responsible for the majority of our crime, because in the same way as we have burglaries committed, it is the same individuals that we see that are present in shoplifting.
Yeah.
So that response to understanding the scale of criminality that they're involved in and responding to that by pursuing them and ensuring that they are brought to justice for the crimes that they commit, whilst also being given those rehabilitative opportunities, is really important. And shoplifting doesn't sit apart in relation to burglary and theft of vehicle, because it is the same individuals that are involved in all of that. So that's the first thing, is our response is to look at the offender rather than look at the individual crime types. However, the issues around shoplifting, we have seen an increase, and we've seen an increase that is identified in my performance report in North Worcestershire, and we've done a lot of work to understand exactly why stores are vulnerable, which stores are vulnerable, and how we can work with the retailers to make sure that we design out those opportunities, so that we don't create an opportunity for somebody who is looking for a a piece of property to sell on, and we don't create those opportunities for them. So we do quite a lot around that. We also do a huge amount of work, and we are supported by our retailers with Shopwatch, which gives us the opportunity, when our officers are out about in the town, our PCSOs and our Safer Neighbourhood teams, to be able to understand who is in the town centre, who is looking for these opportunities, and for us to be able to take that preventative approach with them. So those two areas are really effective. We also look at using other legislation we can, like criminal prevention orders, etc. It's fairly new for us, but we are doing all of that work with the retailers, the offenders, and any other opportunity that's available to try and reduce that the opportunity really.
And all town centres will have a dedicated local policing team now that's identifiable. We've invested £1 million or identified £1 million in CCTV in terms of upgrading equipment. And I suppose the last part of the question, we need to move on to some more public questions, is around is the force confident? Is there other things we could be doing, or I could be supporting as Commissioner, that we're not currently doing?
Can I just add one real quick one to that? Because a lot of the public, unless you are a shop owner, you may not feel that connected to shoplifting because it's not actually affecting you. But I'm advised that the sort of proceeds of shoplifting can involve all sorts of other activity, which might therefore impact more on the public in general.
So yeah, I mean it does. So we take a long-term view in relation to shoplifting to understand exactly what problem we've got where, what type of property is being targeted, where the avenues are for disposing of that. And we do quite a lot of work in terms of understanding how we can cut those, cut that off and break that cycle really. At the moment, as you say, there has been an investment in CCTV. I don't think there is anything else that we can, reasonably come and ask you for. It's about that longer term view. It's about carrying on with the good work that our SNTs do. It's around understanding when our prolific offenders are out, and it's about taking the opportunity, as they are taking the opportunity, to prevent them from doing what they are doing.
Okay. Thank you for that. We hold a monthly performance meeting with Anthony and Amanda, and we publish a summary of those discussions on our website. There are some other bits that we will pick up in private session, and then we publish a summary afterwards that are more sensitive operationally, but we do publish those afterwards, and we'll pick those up after we've finished the broadcast.